Within Chapter 4, we will look at the development of a safety program within your EMS agency. Once completed with this module, you should be able to articulate the concepts of a safety program, recognize the importance of a safety program, describe what it means to have a culture of safety, and explain the process of establishing a safety committee. In this particular scenario, your insurance carrier just completed a safety audit of your agency and recommended that a safety committee be established. While your EMS agency has utilized numerous committees in the past for various initiatives, it never coordinated a safety committee. Where do you begin? What should be the safety committee's specific responsibilities? Your insurance carrier also wants to know when the committee is established and active. The benefit to your agency is that it can qualify for a savings on insurance premiums once the committee is functioning. The good news is that your EMS chief supports the creation and functioning of a safety committee and has made its establishment part of your personal goals and objectives for the upcoming year. You are excited about this opportunity but are not sure how to start. What should you do? Where do you begin? What should be the safety committee's responsibilities? What assistance do you think the insurance company can provide? These are just some of the questions you may have if starting a safety committee from scratch. By the time you are completed with this chapter, you should hopefully have some of the answers to these questions. To begin, there are 4 issues that must be addressed within this context: the organization's safety program, fostering a culture of safety, the functioning of the safety committee, and hazard identification activities. To begin the discussion on developing a safety program within your organization, we'll look at mechanisms that can be employed within organizations to control hazards and safety risks within the workplace. Industrial hygienists commonly recognize 2 types of controls that are employed to control, reduce, or mitigate hazards. The first type of control is an engineering control. These controls identify the hazard and attempt to minimize or reduce the hazard through engineering or design principles. Because people can make mistakes, engineering controls try to change the environment or equipment so that individuals are protected from such mistakes. A routine example of an engineering control in EMS was the creation of self-capping or safety IV catheter needles. If, through the action of removing a needle from a catheter, the needle automatically retracts or is capped, there is less exposure to needle stick injuries, not because the provider is doing something different, but because the tools used by that provider have been designed differently to reduce that risk. This is in contrast to an administrative control, which requires the modification of human behavior to reduce or mitigate a potential risk. Before self-capping IV needles were created, EMS providers were taught to not manually recap needles, to not bend needles, and to discard of needles in sharps containers immediately after use. The change or control in this case was not one of design as related to a tool or implement of the job, nor did it involve changing the environment in which the work was performed. Rather, the control was administrative in that providers had to modify behavior through policies, procedures, and protocols. One of the issues, though, is that administrative controls are still subject to human error and complacency. Engineering controls, when they can be employed, are the preferred method of eliminating or reducing exposure to safety hazards. Sometimes these 2 types of controls are used in conjunction with each other to hopefully eliminate the safety risk entirely. Even with the advent of self-capping IV needles, providers are still taught to not bend needles, attempt to recap needles, and to discard of them in sharps containers immediately. These administrative controls may be somewhat redundant now given a needle that has retracted or capped itself, but such administrative controls on top of an engineering control have little to no cost associated with them, and the extra efforts simply enhance what has become a much safer activity for the provider. The use of personal protective equipment is another type of administrative control. EMS providers must take affirmative steps to use personal protective equipment, such as gloves, eye shields, face masks, gowns, and other such equipment. Again, the largest problem with the use of PPE can be complacency or omission on the part of the provider. Do your EMS providers carry eye protection with them at all times? If not, procedures for using eye protection lose effectiveness if the PPE is not readily available. Then again, how many providers use eye protection without face protection? OSHA best practices recognize that if the situation is one that necessitates eye protection, face protection should also be worn. PPE can be uncomfortable and, unfortunately, complacency in conjunction with human nature can greatly diminish the effectiveness of PPE when it is simply not worn by the provider. The lack of control interim measures is actually a temporary use of an engineering or administrative control. An interim measure is the temporary use of an engineering or administrative control, or both, while a permanent solution is being developed. Looking at these controls in a little more depth, we'll begin with engineering controls, which are based on three simple principles. The first principle involves the intentional design of the facility, equipment, or process to remove or mitigate the hazard. If possible, the hazard may be substituted with something else that generates less risk. These are controls that are in place and function without the need for human intervention. Airbags in a vehicle, for instance, are a type of engineering control designed to mitigate the risks to a vehicle occupant in the event of a crash. The second engineering control principle is to enclose a hazard to prevent exposure during normal operations. A very simple example would be any type of electrical device. To avoid the risk of shock, electrical devices are built with the electrical components enclosed within some type of protective housing, thus preventing direct human contact with the electricity within the device. The last principle, if the first two are not available, is to establish barriers or ensure adequate ventilation to reduce exposure to the hazard in normal operations. Assuming your car is not electric, it generates carbon monoxide and other harmful gases as it operates. To protect the occupants within the car, those gases go through a catalytic converter and are diverted outside the vehicle through the vehicle's exhaust system, thus preventing the harmful exhaust from entering the passenger compartment. As mentioned previously, engineering controls are the preferred way of minimizing or eliminating risk within the workplace, as engineering controls are designed to work without any affirmative human thought or intervention once they are in place. There are also numerous instances, however, in which engineering controls are not an available option for whatever reason. When that is the case, administrative controls are employed. Administrative controls are aimed at reducing personnel exposure to hazards, generally by designing safe work practices, scheduling, and job enrichment. While they are not a substitute for more effective or reliable engineering controls, they are still better than nothing. Within the practice of EMS, consider work at the scene of a motor vehicle accident and the numerous hazards that present themselves at such a scene. It is typically not feasible to stop or divert all traffic, so we use several administrative controls to minimize the risk to personnel functioning on such a scene, such as parking the ambulance to protect the scene and the use of high visibility vests to alert the motorist to the presence of workers on the roadway. These controls are obviously not foolproof, but they do help mitigate the risk faced by providers at such scenes. Another example of an administrative control is ensuring personnel are well rested and take breaks as appropriate during prolonged incidents. Because PPE does not reduce or eliminate a hazard, it is considered an administrative control. When used in conjunction with other administrative or engineering controls, however, PPE can be very effective in reducing exposure to hazards in the workplace. As mentioned previously, interim measures make temporary use of engineering and/or administrative controls while a more permanent solution is developed or employed. As far as workplace practices are concerned, OSHA has numerous standards that apply to EMS. These standards commonly address administrative controls through safe work practices and address things like respiratory protection, lockout-tagout, confined space entry, hazard communication, bloodborne pathogens, hearing conservation, and hazardous materials response, among other things. OSHA also has something called the General Duty Clause, which maintains that an employer has the general duty to provide a workplace that is as safe as possible for its employees. This clause recognizes industry-specific standards developed by other agencies and entities outside of OSHA and applies those standards to the industry. A common example within emergency services is the applicability of NFPA standards. If a fire department or, in some cases, an EMS agency fails to follow a NFPA standard related to safety and a worker is injured, OSHA may fine the employer based upon the NFPA standard violation, even if OSHA did not have a regulation that specifically addressed the underlying cause of the injury. With these controls and standards in mind, it is now time to discuss the creation of a safety program within your EMS agency. To begin, while safety is obviously everyone's responsibility, there must be someone within the organization ultimately responsible for the EMS agency's safety program. This person must be a leader in the truest sense of the word, as it can be difficult to move safety initiatives forward in an organization. The person responsible for the safety program must have the authority to make changes while also having the interpersonal skills to sell the program to both management as well as the workforce. When establishing a safety program, or even in the maintenance of an existing safety program, remember that you need not create the program from scratch without any help or resources. Do not hesitate to seek assistance from other EMS agencies that have their own safety programs. If you are a member of a professional EMS organization or trade association, check to see what resources may be available through the organization or association to assist with the creation or management of an EMS safety program. There are numerous resources available on the internet, and even regulatory agencies responsible for employee safety and health routinely make resources available to help employers in their respective safety and health initiatives. Lastly, be sure to be well informed regarding not only broad safety and health principles, but also with the specifics of your particular workplace environment. Identify what you already do well, in addition to areas that may need improvement. Evaluate safety and health across your facilities, if you have more than one, in addition to looking at activities that occur in the field. What is your organization's history with workplace safety and health? What is the level of education and training of your employees? Do you have any equipment needs to support your safety and health initiative? These are just some of the questions you will want to explore when gathering facts related to your specific organization's safety and health status. It has been said that people do not plan to fail, they fail to plan. Planning is a critical component in developing and maintaining an effective safety and health program within your workplace. As discussed within WCTC's EMS Legal and Political Aspects course, which is part of the WCTC EMS Leadership and Management Technical Diploma program, providing notice to your employees of their right to a safe working environment is mandated by OSHA. While the poster changes every so often, OSHA requires the current iteration of its job safety and health poster to be prominently displayed for employees at all workplaces. In terms of planning and ensuring your safety and health program meets the needs of your particular organization, there are several activities that will need to be performed by those responsible for designing and ultimately maintaining the program. A worksite analysis involves examinations of your various worksites to identify existing hazards, including conditions and operations that may create hazards if they are changed. Begin by conducting comprehensive surveys of your facilities and worksites. Your workers' compensation insurance carrier may even have resources available to assist you in conducting these surveys. If your agency is considering a change in equipment or operating policies, be sure to analyze that change for potential safety and health impacts. Be sure to also evaluate illness and injury trends using historical data, which may be found on your OSHA 300 log or workers' compensation documentation. Are there any trends that emerge? If so, your safety and health program will want to address them. At some point, it will be necessary to develop and implement your action plan. An effective plan should include a prioritized list of major changes or improvements to be made within the workplace, along with a specific plan for implementation for each change or improvement. Safety and health self-inspections are also important within any effective safety and health program. Evaluate how various jobs and functions are performed by your personnel. Are there any inherent dangers present, and if so, are there any engineering or administrative controls that could be employed to reduce the potential impact of those recognized hazards? When conducting those self-inspections, be sure to evaluate those areas over which you can exert control and influence. For instance, there may be trip hazards on roadways due to poor maintenance, which could have a potential negative impact on your employees when functioning at a motor vehicle collision scene. The underlying condition of the roadway is more than likely out of your control and possibly sphere of influence. Developing policies and procedures for safe functioning at such a scene, however, is something you can address. A list of potential areas to be evaluated during such a self-inspection will be discussed momentarily. OSHA provides a simple worksite analysis flowchart as included here. You can see the process is an ongoing one. Identify hazards, develop or update controls, develop or update inventories, conduct periodic surveys, identify hazards again, and so on. When conducting a self-inspection, look at your receiving and storage, building and grounds, housekeeping, electricity, lighting, HVAC, machinery, personnel, hand and power tools, chemicals, fire prevention, maintenance, PPE, transportation, illness or injury program or supplies, and evacuation plans. Additional information on these different self-inspection categories is available within your textbook. As mentioned previously, there are resources available from numerous sources to assist in establishing a safety and health program within your organization. This particular self-inspection checklist was made available from the Volunteer Firemen's Insurance Services. The goal of any health and safety program is to foster a culture of safety within the organization so that safety is reflected in the attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, values, ways of doing things, and other shared characteristics of all those within the organization. Such a culture develops within an EMS agency through positive workplace attitudes, from the chief to the newest hire, involvement and buy-in of all personnel within the organization, mutual, meaningful, and measurable safety and health improvement goals, policies and procedures that serve as reference tools rather than obscure rules, personnel training at all levels within the organization, and responsibility and accountability throughout the organization. When applied to safety and health efforts, the previous principles help instill a culture of safety by ensuring every person within the organization believes he or she has a right to a safe and healthy workplace, accepts personal responsibility for ensuring his or her own safety and health, and assumes accountability to protect the safety and health of others as well. These shared beliefs, practices, and attitudes form the basis of an organizational culture of safety. To support such a culture, it is also important to ensure management processes are streamlined and improved to convey management's support of such a culture as well. This means all levels within the organization are responsible for safety. The organization has a shared vision of safety and health goals and objectives. Managers and supervisors are held accountable for not only enforcing safe practices, procedures, and protocols, but to also lead by example and practicing what they preach. Personnel must feel safe to share suggestions, concerns, or problems with management. A system must be in place to not only track hazards, but ensure they are addressed within a timely fashion. These processes, along with others shared within the textbook, are vital to support a culture of safety within an EMS organization. As part of fostering a culture of safety, every EMS organization should have an active safety committee tasked with bringing managers and personnel together to achieve and maintain a safe and healthy workplace. The role of the committee is akin to one of a consultant. The committee should identify workplace hazardous conditions and work practices, determine the root causes for those conditions and practices, develop solutions and submit recommendations to correct problems and improve systems, and monitor the progress of recommendations and the quality of safety programs and activities. The overall purpose or mission of the committee is to bring everyone together in a non-adversarial, cooperative effort to promote safety, health, and well-being within the organization. For those organizations without a safety committee, one of the biggest challenges in fostering a culture of safety is establishing and empowering a safety committee. Forward-thinking EMS leaders should recognize the value of maintaining a safe and healthy workforce, which makes the creation of a safety committee an easy decision. Some organizational leaders, however, may take a much more narrow view of such activities, thus requiring some persuasion. If that is the case within your organization, begin the discussions by marketing the benefits of such a committee. Aside from the impact successful safety and health initiatives have on overall morale and job satisfaction, a cost versus benefit analysis can also be performed to show how simple economics also strongly support a culture of safety. For an example of such an analysis, please refer to your textbook. Assuming the benefit and value is established and the creation of a safety committee is supported by leadership within the organization, it can be challenging to determine the makeup of the committee. As the functioning of the committee is supposed to be collaborative, it is important for managers to not dominate the committee. The committee should have an equal representation from both management and the workforce. If there is any disparity, it should be related to more line personnel serving on the committee than managers. For larger organizations, remember as well that larger committees may sometimes stall given their inherent size and diversity in perspectives and opinions. It is therefore important to ensure the committee is large enough to have the resources to perform necessary work without being too large as to negatively impact the effectiveness of the committee. Make sure the committee has ground rules under which it functions to assist in decision-making through group consensus. Once a committee is formed, it is important to maintain a high level of motivation within the committee. The first step in addressing motivation of the committee members is to ensure the committee is properly formed and supported in the first place. Make sure everyone on the committee knows why they are there. Make sure they know they are valued and appreciated for their contributions. Also make sure members are there because they want to be. Appointing or forcing someone to participate on the committee can undermine the committee's effectiveness, especially if that member is not engaged or, worse, actively undermines the committee. Make sure your members have the training necessary to be valuable members of the committee. Invest resources as well. Make sure there is money available to address concerns raised by the committee, and also ensure those participants have the time necessary to be involved on the committee. Having an effective committee chairperson is very important to ensure the meetings are engaging, that one person does not consistently dominate the meeting, that agenda items are addressed, and to ultimately ensure that the committee is productive and moves things through its process. Be sure to celebrate the committee's successes and recognize their contributions to keeping your employees safe and healthy. As stated by the textbook author, management commitment is vital to the success of a safety committee, which means investing time, money, and concern into health and safety activities. As mentioned earlier, the employer can realize both tangible and intangible benefits by supporting a culture of safety, and it will be important for everyone within the organization to see leadership's commitment in safety and health initiatives. Last, when discussing the establishment or maintenance of a safety committee, be sure to consider the power wielded by the committee. Make sure your committee members have the knowledge and training necessary to be effective, and also ensure the committee has a direct line of communication to top leaders within the organization. While final authority to implement changes suggested by the committee will lie with a high-level manager, empowering the committee to evaluate the organization and make expert recommendations on safety and health improvements within the organization will be important in ensuring the committee is an effective one. To ensure your safety committee is effective, adequate training is of utmost importance. While EMS providers may have some inherent understanding of safe work practices, that is just one component of what safety committees address. Adequate training should encompass safety and health concepts, principles, and methods, leadership and communication skills, meeting management skills, analysis, evaluation, and problem-solving skills, writing skills, and the ability to submit persuasive proposals. As such, minimum requirements for any committee member should include knowledge and training on safety committee operations and how to conduct meetings, hazard identification and control concepts and methods, and accident investigation procedures. This training should also include instruction on the operation of the committee and expectations of its members. While there are many ways this can be accomplished, it can be beneficial for new members to be mentored with hands-on training on a one-on-one basis with an experienced mentor. If you spend enough time in a leadership or management position in any organization, you will have an opportunity to experience a variety of meetings, from the well-run and purposeful meeting to that which you consider to be a complete waste of time. What are some of those common threads in the great meetings? Usually they have a strong chair who ensures the meetings are on task, follow an agenda with clear outcomes, which was made available to everyone well before the meeting so everyone could come prepared to the meeting, are scheduled for a reasonable time frame, and produce results. The textbook author recommends that meetings be conducted on a regular basis and last no more than an hour in length. As routine agenda items, the committee should review safety and health inspection reports to help correct safety hazards, evaluate the accident investigations conducted since the last meeting to determine if the cause of the unsafe situation was identified and corrected, and evaluate its workplace accident and illness prevention program and discuss recommendations for improvement if needed. Minutes should be taken with attendance recorded. Those minutes should then be made available to everyone in the organization to ensure the work of the safety committee remains transparent. One of the tasks of the safety committee is to identify and control workplace hazards. The fire or EMS station itself has numerous hazards that must be mitigated. Beyond the station, any experienced EMS provider can list numerous hazards that commonly exist at an emergency incident. The safety committee's activities regarding the identification and control of hazards must be all-encompassing to truly be effective. Within hazard identification and control activities are hazard analyses, hazard classification, principles of hazard identification and control, and processes to identify and catch hazards. We'll discuss these activities within the upcoming slides. As far as hazard identification and control activities are concerned, hazard analysis techniques can be rather complex, and industrial hygienists receive considerable education and training on the subject to be highly effective. Within the auspices of an EMS safety committee, it is not likely that anyone on the committee will have the same level of training and education, so here are some of the most common techniques employed in conducting a hazard analysis. A what-if checklist combines the creative thinking of a selected team of specialists with the methodical focus of a prepared checklist. The result is a comprehensive process hazards analysis that is extremely useful in training operating personnel on the hazards of the particular operation. Insurance carriers will occasionally have such checklists available for use depending on the particular hazard. A hazard and operability study is a formally structured method of systematically investigating each element of a system for all the ways in which important parameters can deviate from the intended design conditions to create hazards and operability problems. The hazard and operability problems are typically determined by a study of the diagrams by a team of personnel who critically analyze the effects of potential problems arising in the operation. This typically means watching people do their jobs to see what deviations from protocol occur and how such deviations negatively impact safety. For instance, an IV catheter with a retractable needle is only effective if the provider pushes the button to retract the needle after the venipuncture is completed. Failing to push the button and leaving the sharps needle exposed, even if the provider places the needle directly into a sharps container, is an example of how the provider deviated from intended design or practice, thus exposing him or herself to additional unnecessary risk. A failure mode and effect analysis is a methodical study of component failures that starts with a diagram of the process that includes all components that could fail and the conceivable effects of such a failure would have on safety within the entire process. Lastly, a fault tree analysis is a quantitative assessment of all the undesirable outcomes that could result from a specific initiating event. It begins with a graphic representation using logic symbols of all possible sequences of events that could result in an incident. The resulting diagram looks like a tree with many branches. Each branch lists the sequential events or failures for different independent paths to the top event. Probabilities using failure rate data are assigned to each event and then used to calculate the probability of occurrence of the undesired event. The committee may also use less means of evaluating hazards given familiarity with the work environment and applicable standards, somewhat similar to conducting a fire inspection for health and safety hazards. If the committee members conduct a walk-around inspection, again, kind of like a fire inspection for health and safety hazards, they will commonly look for hazards within 4 specific categories: hazardous materials, equipment, machinery, and tools, environmental hazards, and personnel behaviors or work practices. Typically, most accidents are caused by the combination of work processes and management dysfunction that allows the unsafe or unhealthy behavior to exist or continue. One such common practice in EMS is the use of 24-hour shifts without mandatory sleep time. Research has shown that someone driving a vehicle with significant fatigue is just as impaired as a drunk driver. Yet EMS providers are routinely expected to function on little to no sleep over the duration of a 24-hour shift. Additional research in the military has drawn a strong correlation between military suicides and chronic sleep deprivation. This may very well prove to be one of those areas where unsafe practice is not only allowed but supported by management despite evidence that shows how dangerous the practice may be. As some practices are deeply ingrained within the profession and its culture, progressive leadership and a strong safety and health committee are vital to changing the status quo in such instances. As mentioned by the textbook author, safety committee members must know basic hazard identification and control concepts and methods to be effective. Routine walk-through safety inspections are common and have been shown to be effective in spotting workplace hazards so long as those conducting the inspections are trained in and familiar with hazard identification. Once a hazard has been identified, mitigation of that hazard then becomes the committee's priority to eliminate or reduce the hazard. The most common strategy, which will be discussed in a little bit, is to apply the hierarchy of controls. Safety committee members should be familiar with and follow a process for identifying basic hazards. The first technique in identifying hazards is to conduct formal observations of the workplace and associated processes. Within this process, committee members are assigned the task of completing a minimum number of observations of safe and unsafe behaviors during a given period of time. This data is gathered and analyzed to produce graphs and charts reflecting the current status of and trends in provider behaviors. By raising awareness through the use of this data, it is possible to reduce workplace injuries. Because it is important for the committee members to obtain valid and reliable data, however, it is important for their observations to not be used in any type of disciplinary process, lest those being observed practice modified behaviors for the period of time they are being observed. A safety inspection is somewhat more rigid than the formal observation process in that checklists are used to identify unsafe or hazardous materials, tools, equipment, station design, noise, atmospheres, temperature extremes, and work practices. Given the scope of this approach, it is important for the person conducting the inspections to have established competence in doing so while also having adequate time to conduct a thorough inspection. A less than thorough safety inspection not only wastes time and resources, but it may also lull employees into a false sense of safety or security when the flawed process does not yield any significant results, despite the fact problems may indeed exist. Depending on your agency's insurance carrier, there may be the opportunity to have someone from the insurance company assist with such an inspection. While there is a cost involved, there are also third-party services available for conducting thorough safety inspections. Lastly, it is easier to avoid hazards in the first place by maintaining an organized workplace. Poor housekeeping can contribute to low morale, sloppy work, and a myriad of hidden hazards. Items that should be addressed include unnecessary clutter, storage of flammables, clear exits and hallways, adequate lighting, and other environmental aspects. Once hazards are recognized and attempts are made to mitigate or remove them, it is important to ensure the hazards do not reappear. This requires diligence on the part of the employer and the safety committee. The first line of defense is to make sure your EMS providers have multiple mechanisms for reporting safety and health issues. This could include a suggestion box, a safety and health email address, direct reporting to a supervisor, or other ways to report a concern. While the goal of safety and health initiatives is to avoid accidents, when they do occur, it is important to utilize the accident or incident investigation process to identify lingering hazards and address them. Along these lines, it is also a good best practice to have a near-miss reporting system as well. A near miss is an accident that did not occur simply because of a fortuitous circumstance. The underlying problem responsible for the near miss must still be addressed to avoid an actual incident in the future where the provider is simply not as lucky as the last time to avoid the accident. Whether an actual incident or a near miss, the investigation and report should always try to answer the who, what, where, when, why, and how questions associated with that incident or accident. With that data, the Safety Committee should be able to generate an understanding of the underlying cause of the accident and recommend corrective action to prevent future similar occurrences. Lastly, when there are injuries or illnesses, especially those that are responsible for lost work time, a statistical analysis of those incidents can help identify trends that may prove important in the relationship to the underlying cause of those incidents. Look at who was hurt, what caused the injuries, where and when were those injuries occurring, how did the injuries occur, and why did the injuries occur. In identifying hazards, it is important for your safety committee to look at all aspects of the work environment and workplace practices. As mentioned briefly before, hazardous materials must be identified and controlled within the workplace. Liquid and solid chemicals, such as those used for cleaning and decontamination, can be sources of significant health risks if used or stored inappropriately. Industrial gases can create problems if they leak into the atmosphere or are stored incorrectly. Even seemingly innocuous items can be hazardous in significant quantities or if improperly used or stored. Fire and EMS stations can be home to various types of machinery with their own unique hazards. Grinding machines, hand tools, welders, battery chargers, and other pieces of equipment or machinery can cause minor to significant injuries if used incorrectly. Providing training and ensuring safe work practices are both important when personnel will be using such equipment. While it may seem like an overarching theme, it is important for an employer to track hazardous conditions. whether through paper forms or an electronic database. Collecting and monitoring safety and health data, including the tracking of hazards, is an important element in any hazard identification and control initiative. Within these discussions, it should come as no surprise that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, so to speak. This includes preventative maintenance on equipment and machines to minimize the likelihood of failure, as well as affirmative proactive steps with agency personnel. Such steps begin with a comprehensive medical program. EMS providers should be medically evaluated when hired, and routine follow-up should be performed as deemed necessary. Unfortunately, EMS does not have any nationally recognized standards that address the elements of a comprehensive occupational medical program for EMS providers. It is not uncommon, however, for progressive EMS agencies to adopt NFPA 1582, the standard on comprehensive occupational medical programs for fire departments. Effective programs should include not only medical screening, but should address important subjects of employee safety and health, such as proper nutrition, exercise, stress reduction, psychological health, and adequate sleep, to name just a few. As mentioned by the textbook author, EMS as a profession has historically been horribly remiss in ensuring the physical and psychological well-being of EMS providers. Data provided by a study in GEMS magazine in October 2015 showed that 37% of EMS respondents contemplated suicide compared to just 3.7% from the CDC national average. 6.6% of the respondents actually attempted suicide compared with 0.5% of those within the CDC national averages. Another study in GEMS from March 2012 found that 77% of EMS providers within Boston were either overweight or obese, with 75% being hypertensive or prehypertensive. In light of 11% of on-duty EMS personnel deaths resulting from cardiovascular disease, this is a systemic problem for the entire EMS industry that must be addressed. Beyond a comprehensive medical program, EMS employers should also provide safety and health training to its providers. To be effective, the EMS providers must understand the purpose of such training, and the information should be organized to maximize effectiveness. People learn best when they can immediately practice and apply newly acquired knowledge and skills, so ensure the trainees have an opportunity to not only practice, but also receive feedback on their performance. It is also beneficial to incorporate a variety of training methods to accommodate various learners with individual learning preferences. Having qualified and credentialed instructors is important, and depending on where a service is located, additional resources may be available to assist from a community or technical college. While it is easy to see how preventative maintenance is important for EMS equipment and machinery, it is also critically important to recognize the value of preventative maintenance for EMS providers as well, through the use of a comprehensive medical program and adequate ongoing training related to safety and health principles and initiatives. With all that in mind, you should now have a better idea of how to approach the creation of a new safety and health committee within your own EMS organization. Put together a plan and ensure organizational leadership buys in. Having a recommendation from the agency's insurance carrier can be helpful, and do not forget to use that insurance carrier as a resource as well. Find the right people to serve on the committee, and then hold your first meeting. Now that you are completed with this module, you should be able to describe the hierarchy of controls and the 4 general strategies associated with them. Describe the 3 major activities of a workplace assessment. Explain the composition of a safety culture. Explain the role and responsibility of the safety committee. Identify the purposes of the safety committee. Define expert power and position power. Explain what constitutes a hazard. Describe the questions to ask when using the OSHA 300 log to trend losses. And identify the 5 principles of teaching and learning to maximize the effectiveness of your safety program.